Tonight, I want to begin with something uncomfortable, a question that almost no leader wants to answer. What does winning look like now? Not in speeches, not in slogans, not in press releases, in reality, in blood, in budgets, in politics, in time. Because the war in Ukraine is exposing something fundamental about modern conflict. Many wars no longer end. They fade, they freeze, they mutate, they drag on, they exhaust societies, they blur victory and defeat until both sides claim something and pay everything. Ukraine is not just fighting Russia, it is fighting this new condition of war itself. For most of the 20th century, wars had endings. World War II ended with surrender. The Korean War ended with an armistice. The Gulf War ended with retreat. The Cold War ended with collapse. Even messy conflicts had moments that felt decisive. Flags raised, treaties signed, borders redrawn. History books close chapters. Ukraine offers no such clarity. Front lines move, then stop, then move again. Territory is gained, then lost, then contested. Ceasefires fail, negotiations stall, offensives exhaust, mobilizations repeat, the war resets again and again. This is not stagnation, it is endurance warfare. Russia entered Ukraine expecting collapse, a quick decapitation, a friendly government, minimal resistance, maximum leverage. That plan failed spectacularly. Ukraine resisted, mobilized, unified, survived. What followed was improvisation on both sides, adapting, relearning, rebuilding, and settling into something neither wanted, a long war. Ukraine's early victories around Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson created hope, momentum, narratives of inevitable success. But modern wars punish optimism. Russia adapted, fortified, mobilized, dug in. Built layered defenses, absorbed losses, converted population and economy to war footing. Ukraine faced structural limits, manpower, ammunition, air defense, time, support dependence. Victory became harder, not impossible, harder. Western support changed the balance, but not decisively. Weapons arrive, training expands, intelligence flows, but always with limits. Escalation fears, political cycles, budget fights, public fatigue. Ukraine never receives everything, never receives it all at once, never receives it without conditions. That is coalition warfare. It saves and constrains. Russia fights differently. It sacrifices efficiency for mass, quality for quantity, lives for ground. It absorbs punishment because its political system tolerates loss, suppresses dissent, controls narrative, mobilizes fear. That gives it endurance at enormous human cost. This produces a stalemate dynamic, not static, but grinding, attritional, incremental, measured in meters, villages, intersections, supply routes, not cities, not capitals, not regimes. Wars like this are won slowly, if at all. They test societies more than armies. Look at Ukraine's home front: air raids, power outages, mobilization notices, funerals, displacement, trauma. Every family affected, every town marked, every year heavier, yet morale holds because the alternative is submission, and Ukrainians know what that looks like. Bucha, Mariupol, occupation, disappearances, torture, repression. Endurance is rational. Look at Russia's home front: sanctions, inflation, casualties, mobilization, emigration, isolation, but also propaganda, repression, nationalism, fear. The regime has insulated itself. Pain is unevenly distributed. Urban elites adapt, rural regions bleed, the system absorbs shock. For now, modern warfare is industrial again. Shell production, drone factories, electronic supply chains, logistics hubs, repair depots, stockpiles. Wars are won by spreadsheets as much as strategy. Ukraine depends on partners. Russia depends on shadow networks. Both race to sustain output. This is economic warfare disguised as combat. Another shift: time as weapon. Russia believes it can wait, outlast Western attention, survive sanctions, wear down unity, exploit elections, exploit divisions, exploit fatigue. Ukraine believes it must act, regain territory, maintain momentum, justify support, preserve hope. This asymmetry shapes everything. One side waits, the other must prove. Negotiations reflect this imbalance. Talks surface, disappear, resurface, fail. Neither side believes compromise guarantees security. Ukraine fears frozen conflict, permanent vulnerability, loss of sovereignty. Russia fears defeat, loss of prestige, regime instability. So both prefer continuation. Despite costs, this is tragic and rational. Victory in this context is redefined. For Ukraine, survival, sovereignty, integration with Europe, security guarantees, recovery, democracy intact. For Russia, no collapse, territorial leverage, domestic stability, recognition, influence. Neither goal requires total victory. Both require endurance. History offers parallels. Iran-Iraq War, Afghanistan, Korea, Cyprus, Nagorno-Karabakh, frozen conflicts, prolonged wars, unfinished business. Ukraine risks joining this category unless something breaks politically, economically, militarily, externally. Another factor, technology, drones, AI targeting, satellite surveillance, electronic warfare, precision strikes. These tools increase lethality, but also stalemate. Defenses adapt, countermeasures emerge, battlefields become transparent, breakthroughs are harder, surprise is rare, attrition dominates, public opinion matters more than ever in democracies, in autocracies, in alliances, support fluctuates, narratives compete, disinformation spreads, attention drifts. Ukraine must constantly explain its relevance, its urgency, its morality. War becomes a communications campaign without pause. The human cost accumulates invisibly. PTSD, disability, demographic loss, brain drain, family separation, orphans, widows. These are not battlefield statistics. They shape generations. Ukraine will carry this burden for decades. So will Russia. So will Europe. Reconstruction is already contested. Who pays? Who controls contracts? Who monitors corruption? Who sets priorities? Rebuilding is political. Victory depends on governance after fighting, not just during. The danger of permanent war is normalization. Societies adapt, lower expectations, accept losses, redefine suffering. Emergency becomes routine. This erodes democracy, trust, social cohesion. It is war's hidden victory over everyone. Yet Ukraine resists normalization. It plans, reforms, integrates, modernizes, prepares for peace while fighting. That is extraordinary. It refuses to let war define its identity, only its urgency. The world must confront this reality. Future wars may not end cleanly. They may stretch across decades with pauses, surges, freezes, thaws, and societies will be judged not by how fiercely they fight, but by how long they can endure without losing themselves. Ukraine is teaching that lesson. At terrible cost, with courage, with sacrifice, with uncertainty. It is fighting for land, yes, but also for meaning, for a future where victory is not just survival, but renewal. This is the new age of war. No parades, no treaties, no final pages, just resilience, adaptation, and the long struggle to turn endurance into peace. War fatigue, politics, and the risk of abandonment. Wars are not only fought at the front, they are fought in parliaments, in television studios, on social media, in budget committees, in election campaigns, in living rooms, on grocery receipts. And over time, the battlefield that matters most may not be the one with trenches and drones. It may be the one with voters, because modern wars depend on consent, and consent erodes slowly, quietly, relentlessly. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the response across much of the democratic world was immediate and emotional. Shock, outrage, solidarity, flags projected on buildings, mass rallies, emergency aid, weapons shipments, sanctions passed in days, leaders spoke in moral language, democracy versus aggression, freedom versus tyranny. It felt clear, urgent, unified, but urgency fades. War fatigue is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It seeps in through repetition, through routine, through the normalization of crisis. Missile strikes become background noise, frontline updates become scrollable content, casualty numbers blur, and attention drifts. In democratic societies, attention is finite, elections approach, inflation rises, housing costs surge, healthcare strains, immigration debates intensify, domestic politics reassert themselves, and foreign wars compete for space. Support for Ukraine remains substantial in many countries, but it is no longer automatic. It must be argued, defended, funded, reapproved every year, sometimes every month. That is the burden of coalition warfare. Budget votes become battlegrounds. Aid packages stall. Legislatures debate. Conditions are attached. Timelines shrink. Delays multiply. Not necessarily out of hostility, but out of politics. Elected officials answer to constituents, and constituents ask, how long? How much? What is the end game? These are reasonable questions. But in wartime, reasonable questions can produce dangerous hesitation. In the United States, Ukraine aid has become entangled with broader partisan struggles: border policy, spending limits, election positioning, foreign policy identity. Support is no longer purely strategic, it is political currency, and currency fluctuates. In Europe, elections test solidarity. Populist parties gain traction by promising negotiation, by criticizing sanctions, by emphasizing domestic hardship, by questioning open-ended commitments. They do not necessarily admire Moscow, but they exploit fatigue. Fatigue is fertile ground. Authoritarian states understand this dynamic intimately. Russia's strategy assumes time favors it, not because it is winning decisively, but because democracies cycle. Governments change, coalitions fracture, budgets tighten, media moves on. Russia calculates that Western unity is temporary, that endurance is asymmetric, that one side must constantly renew consent, the other does not. That is strategic patience. Ukraine feels this pressure daily. Every delay in ammunition delivery has consequences. Every stalled vote shifts morale. Every headline about wavering support is amplified by Russian media because morale is a supply line. Confidence is a weapon. Abandonment, or even the perception of it, is destabilizing. Ukrainian soldiers fight not only with rifles and drones, they fight with the knowledge that they are not alone. If that certainty weakens, the psychological cost rises. There is another dimension to fatigue, empathy exhaustion. The first images from Bucha, from Mariupol, from bombed maternity hospitals, they shocked the world, but shock cannot be sustained indefinitely. Human psychology protects itself. It numbs, it compartmentalizes, it moves forward. That is normal. But war continues regardless of emotional capacity. And that mismatch creates distance, energy prices, food inflation, refugee integration costs, defense spending increases. All of these are connected to the war, and they are felt locally. Politicians must justify trade-offs: healthcare versus artillery, education versus sanctions, domestic investment versus foreign aid. Even when the moral case is strong, the arithmetic is hard. Long wars strain budgets and patience. There is also strategic ambiguity. What does success look like? Full territorial restoration, negotiated settlement, frozen conflict, security guarantees, regime change in Moscow? Without a clearly defined end state, voters struggle to measure progress. And when progress is unclear, skepticism grows. Ambiguity fuels doubt. Doubt fuels hesitation. Hesitation fuels risk. For Ukraine, the risk of abandonment is existential. If support drops below a certain threshold, air defense weakens. Ammunition shortages widen. Infrastructure vulnerability increases. Economic collapse looms. The front could shift rapidly, not because Ukraine lacks courage, but because modern warfare depends on sustained supply. The line between support and survival is thin. Yet abandonment is not binary. It does not require a dramatic announcement. It can occur gradually through slower shipments. Reduce budgets, shifting attention, lower urgency, diplomatic pressure to be realistic, encouragement toward compromise without leverage, subtle signals, small retreats, cumulative effect. That is how coalitions weaken. Russia's strategy amplifies this. Information operations target Western audiences, highlight corruption allegations, exaggerate aid misuse, promote narratives of futility, frame the war as endless, point to domestic problems. The message is simple. It's not worth it. Even modest doubt is useful, because democracies react to doubt. Authoritarian systems suppress it, but fatigue does not automatically equal abandonment. There is another possibility: normalization of commitment. A shift from emergency aid to structured, long-term support, from reactive packages to strategic planning, from emotional solidarity to institutionalized partnership. That requires leadership, clarity, communication, honesty about costs, honesty about timelines, honesty about risks. Leaders must explain why Ukraine matters beyond morality, why its sovereignty affects European stability, why aggression unchecked invites repetition, why deterrence depends on credibility, why the price of support may be lower than the price of expansion. These arguments must be repeated, reinforced, updated, because public support is not static, it must be cultivated. Ukraine itself plays a role. Transparency, anti-corruption reforms, military effectiveness, strategic discipline, these build trust. Trust sustains support. Support sustains survival. The relationship is circular and fragile. There is also the generational factor. Young voters did not grow up with Cold War memory. For them, Ukraine is distant, abstract, competing with climate change, economic insecurity, social justice. Leaders must connect these dots, explain interdependence, link security to prosperity, demonstrate relevance, otherwise fatigue deepens. The greatest danger is not opposition, it is indifference. Opposition can be debated, indifference cannot. It erodes silently until one day urgency is gone, and with it, leverage. Ukraine is fighting a war measured in years. Democracies often think in months. Bridging that gap is the central political challenge, because endurance is not only military, it is civic, it is economic, it is psychological, it is democratic. Abandonment would not just affect Ukraine, it would reshape global perceptions of Western resolve, of alliance reliability, of security guarantees. It would echo in Asia, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in every place watching. Credibility once lost is difficult to regain. War fatigue is inevitable. Abandonment is not. The difference depends on leadership, on communication, on strategy, on honesty, on institutional design, on whether democracies can sustain commitment without crisis adrenaline. That is the real test, not only of Ukraine, but of the societies supporting it. The battlefield in Ukraine is visible. The battlefield of attention is not. But it may determine everything, because wars today are won not only by firepower, but by staying power. And staying power begins at home.